Josh is a small-town cook, whose identical twin, Julian, invites him to watch his culinary competition. Josh impersonates Julian at the contest, while developing feelings for the event planner Meg. Josh's boss asks him to hurry into the kitchen. He is inspired to make a baked Alaska from his mother's recipe. His boss reminds Josh that he's a cook at a diner in Yakutat, Alaska. He needs Josh to stick to the menu. Preston Westcott is trying to acquire a castle in Europe. He meets his daughter Meg for lunch. She's planning a trip to Malta, where she's managing the 87th Annual International Escoffier Culinary Competition. Preston thinks of it as a cooking show. Meg thinks of it as the Olympics for rising chefs. Preston wants Meg to work for him again, but she plans to run her event planning business without his help. Westcott Enterprises is the most prestigious hotelier in the world. Even Hotel Phoenicia in Malta, where her culinary competition is being held, is theirs. Meg thanks him for letting her host it there, but she needs to prove herself. Preston doesn't feel good about building an empire if his only daughter doesn't want to run it. Meg reminds him that she needs to run her own empire. Josh calls Henry to ask about Julian, his twin brother. Julian approaches Preston after finding his name in the reservations. He ignores Meg and suggests partnering his restaurant with Preston's hotels. Preston is frustrated because Meg needs to run his food and beverage department. Meg knows Julian has more things to worry about as one of their chefs. She explains that she's running the culinary contest in Malta. Julian knows Heike Muller is in charge. Meg explains that while Heike runs the academy and the contest, she runs the event. Julian loses interest in Meg again and thinks of her as someone who can hand him his trophy. Julian receives Josh's call, who wishes him luck in the culinary competition. Julian wants Josh to tag along since he's allowed an extra guest. Josh reminds Julian that he is a big, fancy chef with his bistro in New York. Josh thinks of himself as a lowly cook at a diner in Alaska. Julian doesn't understand why Josh wants to stay at a place where there's no hope. He throws in some French words that irritate Josh every time. Julian thinks Josh is repeating history by passing up on a trip to Malta. Josh is mad that Julian didn't join him in Alaska when their father passed away. Julian is frustrated that Josh passed up a scholarship to the best culinary school in Paris. He did it so he could stay behind when their mother passed away. Julian wants Josh to be in Malta so he can be among the best chefs in the world. Henry, Julian's husband, has also not seen Josh since their wedding 3 years ago. Josh gets screamed at again at work, so he decides to join Julian. Meg is glad that her friend Annie is managing the hotel in Malta. Josh bumps into Meg and apologizes for being in the way. She assumes he's Julian, but he seems nice this time. They bond over their similar suitcase, in which Josh finds his lucky hat. Meg admits she uses that pocket for her extra stash of chocolates. He promises to keep her secret safe. Meg doesn't understand why Julian seems much nicer than when she met him last. We might have answers. Annie teases her about being interested in him. Meg knows Julian has a husband and dismisses that thought. Henry jokes that Josh looks like someone put Julian in the wilderness. Julian is more nervous about the competition, while Josh insists he's a better chef. Heike doesn't like anything at the event and asks Meg to take care of it. She doesn't care about Annie and threatens to watch Meg's planning closely. Even when Josh wears a shirt, Julian doesn't think he's ready to face the culinary elite. He tries to find something for Josh, but slips on a suitcase and hurts his back again. Henry explains that Julian injured his back when they were renovating the kitchen. They help Julian lay on the bed, but he's worried about registering soon. Josh offers to sign up for him since he will not be allowed to compete otherwise. Josh reminds Julian they always pretended to be each other as kids. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. Julian is worried about someone finding out, but Josh is sure he can manage for 5 minutes. Josh runs into Etienne Leduc, who knows Julian. Etienne jokes that Julian doesn't recognize him because he put on a few extra pounds after culinary school. Josh tries to play along while Etienne claims to be surprised Julian is competing. Etienne knows that Julian's restaurant is struggling and asks him not to be ashamed of it. Josh assures him there's nothing to worry about. Meg hopes Josh is ready to register. He's surprised she already thinks he's Julian and throws in some French words. Meg remembers that he trained in France and talks back to him. She asks about Henry, who is his sous chef, and his brother Josh. Josh tries to be dismissive of himself like he usually is. Meg still hopes to see Josh at the competition. This is confusing already. She makes him sign a contract to confirm his identity. She assures him she doesn't need his ID unless he has an evil twin she doesn't know about. Who will tell her? He signs the contract with J. Northrop, which is the name of Julian's hotel. She puts a chef's bracelet on his wrist with a chip that can be used to access his workstation. He needs to keep it on till the end of the event, or he can't compete. Josh informs Julian about the bracelet problem and asks if his restaurant is struggling. Henry explains that they overextended with the renovation. The bank is about to foreclose the loan. They really need the prize money and the recognition of this competition to survive. Julian has given up hope since he can't compete without the wristband. Josh offers to compete with him. Julian can teach him the recipe, and Henry already knows everything as the sous chef. Julian reminds Josh they're in a professional competition where people will watch his every move. Josh is offended that Julian doesn't think he knows how to cook. Henry suggests they should give it a try for the apprentice day. Julian reminds Josh to carry himself in the same way as he does. Julian knows he has no choice but to ask Josh to find a practice place away from the competition area. Henry plans to mingle a little with the guests at the party and slip away. He reminds Josh to act like Julian all the time. Meg is glad to see Josh or Julian. Henry notices how Josh looks at her, so he introduces himself. Meg is delighted to finally meet him and introduces them to other chefs. Meg makes them meet Patrick from Ireland, Chef Deirdre Zidane from Germany, and Etienne from France. She remembers that Etienne and Julian went to culinary school together. The other chefs ask Josh for stories about Etienne, so Henry steps in. He remembers when Etienne shut himself in his room for 3 days to make the perfect soufflé. Meg takes Josh aside to ask Julian's opinion. Not confusing at all. Henry tries to intervene, but Josh follows her. Meg explains that chefs are allowed to use their workstations from the following day. She wants to make sure everything is perfect. Josh assures her he knows his way around a high-end kitchen. Meg feels like she can trust him because he didn't tell Henry about her chocolate obsession. She also wants his brutal honesty. Josh compliments the setup and insists that he loves to create new recipes. He assumes she must know cooking, but she clarifies that events are her passion. She loves coming up with ideas and making things happen. This is her first major event after small parties at her dad's hotels. She needs it to go well so she can launch her own company. I can already see one problem. Josh realizes her father is Preston, but Meg reminds him they met at the restaurant last week. Meg admits she dislikes advertising that her father owns this hotel. She wants to build her reputation on her own merit before launching her company. Josh knows she's more than ready, so she thanks him for calming her nerves. Meg feels like he's two different people, and she can't keep up with him. She's also on point. Josh decides to change the topic and asks if he can practice elsewhere. He claims he doesn't want prying eyes. Meg understands that and asks him to practice wherever he wants. Chester Peel calls out to Julian, but Josh doesn't know who he is. Henry shares how he and Julian met Chester at his restaurant in Malta a few years ago. They became best friends, and Chester gave Julian great advice before he opened J. Northrop. Heike doesn't like Chester attending the event. He knows it's because he beat her at the contest she now runs. Heike gets offended and asks Meg to make sure Chester is escorted outside. Since Josh fumbles in front of Meg, Chester feels like he's acting very differently. Henry's worried about the vibes he noticed between Josh and Meg. Josh insists he was only giving his opinion about the kitchen setups. Julian asks him to be careful, because Meg can't find out about them. Chester finds out about them, so they bring him up to speed. Chester is impressed they're trying to pull off something so bold. He brings them to his old restaurant to practice. Julian is dressed as Josh, so no one knows there are two of them. Julian starts bossing them around and asks Henry to get the ingredients. He asks Josh to get things from the practice kitchen while pretending to be him. Meg shows Josh how to use the wristband to take over the workstation. She assures him he can use whatever he needs from the setup. Meg admits she's glad no chef has complained about anything so far. She's also sure that Etienne is waiting for a reason. Josh feels bad about her dealing with difficult people. Meg reminds him this is her first big event, apart from the party she threw for her grandparents' 40th anniversary when she was 16. Josh is impressed she pulled that off. Josh shared that he wanted to be a chef since his parents taught him how to cook. Meg asks about his mysterious brother. He explains that Josh wants to take back the place they owned in Alaska someday. Josh even got a scholarship like Julian, but chose to stay in Alaska to continue the family legacy. Meg admires that Josh is doing what makes him happy. Josh still wonders how things would be if he took the scholarship. Meg claims to understand that because her dad wants her to work for him. She's determined not to give in. Meg admits she thought Julian was arrogant when she first met him. She has changed her opinion after spending so much time with him. Henry explains that 10 chefs will compete the next day. 5 contestants will be chosen for the next round, in which they will have to use black diamond truffles in a dish. Josh is surprised to learn that truffles cost $900 a pound. Julian insists that good food should not cost that much. Henry explains the top 3 chefs must create a classic peach melba if they make it to the finals. It has to be made with the original ingredients used by Escoffier himself in the late 1800s. Josh wants to experiment with it, but Julian insists they must be traditional with their recipes. He knows Heike doesn't like anything outside the box. Josh finds Meg trying to get chocolates after a long day. Since everything is closed, he reminds her that her dad owns the restaurant. Meg wonders about him growing up in Alaska. She wonders if his brother gets lonely, and Josh admits he does. This is way too confusing. Meg thinks Julian is lucky to have a supportive partner like Henry. She admits she has been single for a while. She was dating a guy who lied to her about his job. He was at home playing video games. Josh opines that he might have been ashamed to tell her the truth. Meg is sure she would have listened to him if he just admitted the truth. She hated that he kept lying and she bought into it. This is not good. She tried to make it work after that, but she couldn't get over the hurt. She tells him about a rule, where if the hurt isn't healed in 2 months, it never will. She hasn't dated anyone since because of trust issues. Meg shares that she wants her dream guy to have a nice job, a place of his own, and good teeth. She also thinks it's essential for him to be ambitious about anything he does. It's important because she also wants to earn her success. Josh assures her no one can think she has been handed down stuff. Julian and Henry come looking for him, so Josh hugs Meg to distract her and asks them to leave. Meg thinks a guy like him would be perfect for her if he weren't married. Etienne makes fun of Josh for taking instructions from Henry. Josh insists they're equal partners and scares Etienne with a knife. Preston informs Meg that he has acquired the castle he wanted. He asks Meg to come over nearby so she can translate for him. She reminds him she has an important job. She wonders if he'll even watch her broadcast. Preston has back-to-back meetings, but he promises to watch it later. Josh notices Meg leaving the area and follows her. She shares what her dad said when he asks about it. He still seems to think of her as a little girl in pigtails. Josh makes her laugh by asking for pictures. He knows every family is complicated. He also always felt like his dad believed in his brother more than him. He asks Meg to believe in her swagger. Heike announces the competition on television. The 10 chefs compete in groups of 5. They have 2 hours to prepare their seafood dishes. Meg takes the camera person along to record their preparations, while the judges take turns checking their progress. With 10 seconds remaining, Josh finishes the dish. Chester and Henry are impressed with Josh, but Julian finds faults in his cooking. Julian doesn't like that he chopped the vegetables instead of dicing them. Josh reminds Julian that he should be thanking him. Julian is worried about his reputation and accuses Josh of changing. Josh reminds Julian that he has become a socialite who speaks phony French words. Julian tries to walk out of the room dramatically, but Josh does it for him. Josh finds Meg at the reception and claims Henry and his brother are in the suite. He suggests there's some family drama he doesn't want to discuss. Heike announces that Etienne, Deirdre, Patrick, and Angelo are chosen for the next round. Julian is the 5th person to qualify too. Meg finds Josh and Henry in the lobby. When she gets a call from her supplier, Henry warns Josh about getting too close to her. Meg has heard that the truffles haven't been shipped yet from France. Josh decides to help so she doesn't get fired. Chester knows a man who deals in black diamond truffles. He's particular about who he sells it to, so Chester asks them to enjoy the market while he works. Julian wants to step out in Josh's clothes, but Henry thinks it's too risky, so close to the competition. Josh learns that Meg's favorite food is a cheeseburger. It has become comfort food after her mother passed away when she was little. Preston always took her for cheeseburgers whenever she was sad. Josh points out how food, in this case, brought her family together. Etienne runs into Julian dressed as Josh. Julian claims he knows Etienne after watching him on the television. Etienne seems sure he is not Julian because of how he is dressed. Julian insists he has a lot in common with his brother. Etienne makes fun of Josh for just being a cook in Alaska. Etienne makes Julian realize that even if he claims to support Josh, he's trying to make him more like him. Josh shares that his favorite dish is baked Alaska. His mother used to make it on special occasions. Meg feels this is why Julian and Josh must have started cooking. Meg gets excited when Chester returns with a bag of truffles. Josh is worried Julian doesn't think he's good enough. Henry reminds Josh that Julian is trying to save his restaurant and prove he can compete at this level. Josh doesn't believe Henry when he claims Julian is trying to impress him. Josh is sure Julian doesn't trust him, but Henry knows he is afraid of losing control. Henry also asks Josh to control his feelings for Meg. He points out that Meg can't know who he is even after the competition. Josh finds Meg at the workstation and tries to get away from her. He still asks if she's hungry. Julian wants to take over in the semifinals. Henry reminds him how risky it is without the wristband. He asks Julian to trust Josh, because he doesn't think Julian does. Josh teaches Meg how to knead bread and stands too close to her. He steps back when she asks about his wedding with Henry. Meg jokes about entering the competition next year, so Josh offers to be her sous chef. Meg thinks she can take her talents to restaurants after making a burger. Josh randomly suggests she can do it for Jay Northrup. Meg gets excited about his interest in partnering with her. Josh realizes what he did and insists he must clear it with Henry first. Meg meets the real Julian in his suite, who is confused about why she's being so friendly. Meg admits she couldn't stop thinking about working with him at Jay Northrup. She feels bad about being too eager and doesn't want to take advantage of him. Julian is offended that Josh suggested something like that. He pretends to be himself and insists any partnership is unlikely. She asks if they need to take 2 months as a joke, but Julian doesn't understand the reference. She comes down to find Josh and Henry at the station. She wonders how he came down so quickly. Henry realizes that the wristband is not working. Meg checks it and realizes there's no power. All their vegetables have also rotten, and Etienne seems to be smiling about it. With just an hour to the semifinals, Meg offers to get Josh supplies from the kitchen. As a rule, Julian is supposed to get his own supplies, but Meg owes him for the truffles. She asks him to use whatever he needs. She even calms him down when he starts panicking. She reminds him that he knows how to experiment with dishes. She finds some fresh juices for a truffle smoothie, which Josh feels is a little off topic. He finds some beef in the fridge and gets an idea. Etienne presents his fancy dish to the judges and is sure he has impressed them. Heike is confused when Julian's team comes forward with a burger. Josh explains that he's trying to prove that the simplest meals can be elevated with truffle. He confidently asserts that he used truffle in the dish and asks the judges to try it out. The finalists are announced, and Julian, Etienne, and Deirdre qualify for it. While Henry rushes to inform Julian, Meg congratulates Josh. She gets distracted by Preston, who wants to see how she is doing. He remembers Julian from when they met at the restaurant. Josh knows Meg is happy about Preston being there, but gets distracted by Julian calling out to him. While Meg goes to check on her Preston, Josh secretly meets Julian. He wants to take over the final round, but Josh reminds him it won't be easy. Julian believes Josh can convince his girlfriend and brings up Josh offering her the restaurant for her events. Josh insists he took care of the little slip-up. He assures Julian that he can handle the final round. Etienne decides to spy on them and overhears Julian reminding Josh that the trophy will have his name. He also asks Josh to stay away from Meg. Etienne asks Meg if she noticed something off about Julian. He also claims Julian is not who he claims to be. Meg doesn't believe him. She reminds Etienne that he shouldn't talk about integrity when she's sure he tried to sabotage Julian's setup. Josh prepares a safe dish for Julian, who asks him to try again. Josh wants to take risks because he knows the other chefs will get creative. Julian insists Josh needs to do things his way and doesn't think he can pull off risks. Preston informs Meg that he must head to Germany for some work. Meg was hoping he would be there for her final day. Meg asks him to look around and realize that she has planned something big herself. When she brings up Julian, Preston informs her that his restaurant is struggling. He explains he had a meal with her at Jay Northrup because he's thinking of buying the building. He asks Meg not to trust someone who can't even confide in her. Preston admits he came by to figure out why Meg wants to stay away from his empire. Meg reminds him that she wants to build something on her own and doesn't need his money. Etienne asks Heike to discuss something important with him. Josh can't stay away from Meg when he notices how upset she looks. She admits she feels terrible because Preston didn't come to support her. Josh also admits he doesn't know what he's doing with the finals. Josh mentions his big plans of making something special in the kitchen, which never worked out. Meg asks him to change Jay Northrup if he's not happy with how it's running. She already has some suggestions about warm colors and making it more romantic. Josh appreciates her advice and admits he's feeling better about himself with all the encouragement he got at this place. Meg also feels like she's finally ready to do her own thing because of people like him she can trust. Heike turns up at Julian's suite with Etienne and asks for his identification. Josh tries to admit who he is, but Meg brings up what Etienne said about him. He almost admits that Etienne is correct, but Meg gets distracted by a call from Heike. They meet her in the contest area, where Heike introduces Meg to the real Julian. Meg is hurt that Josh is a twin, and he lied and pretended to be his brother. Josh tries to explain, but Julian takes the blame. Heike points out that this is a massive embarrassment for the competition. Etienne has agreed to keep quiet about this if both the Northrups are banished from the competition. Heike is disappointed in Meg. She can't fire her because she's the only one who knows what's happening. Josh tries to apologize to Meg, but she walks away. Josh feels terrible for letting Julian down, but Julian knows it's not his fault. Josh remembers the days when things were simpler, and both the brothers cooked with their mom. They remember how close they were until Julian moved out. Julian admits he had to leave Alaska because he didn't belong there. Josh also admits that he kept missing Julian even if he stayed back. Josh has rediscovered his ambition and thanks Julian for inviting him to Malta. He now knows how great he can be outside Alaska. They both hug it out, but Julian insists Josh should clear things out with Meg first. Josh apologizes to Meg, but she's not ready to forgive him yet. She informs him that he can still compete despite false representation. Since he signed the contract as Jay Northrup, it means he didn't exactly lie about his identity. She has noticed this loophole in the contract and asks him to take the risk he wants. He asks what will happen to them, but Meg insists she doesn't know who he is. Heike and Etienne aren't happy with this loophole, but she agrees to let Josh compete because of the contract. Josh points out that the sous chef can also be changed at any point, so Julian becomes his sous chef. With an hour to go, Josh wants to make something creative. He feels like they need to put their Northrup family stamp. For the final round, Josh presents their dish paired with a family recipe. The judges are impressed with their peach Melba-baked Alaska. Heike announces Josh as the winner and hands him the trophy. He thanks Meg for his help because she pushed him to be better. Meg asks for more time to forgive him, so Josh hopes she gets over it in 2 months. Preston calls Meg to congratulate her for pulling this off. He lets her know he is proud of her. Jay and Jay Northrup is all booked up for its grand reopening, with both the brothers running the restaurant. When Meg walks in, Julian takes Henry to the kitchen. Meg got Josh's invite to the restaurant, and she feels the timing is interesting. Their 2 months are about to be over the day after tomorrow. She loves what Josh has done with the place. Josh admits he wanted to continue the family legacy with his only brother in New York. Meg has also started building her empire in New York. Josh shows her the menu, which features Meg's Black Diamond Truffle Burger. She's impressed that he did this for her, and he introduces himself again as Josh. He knows she has forgiven him and kisses her. Julian reminds him they must open the doors, but Josh and Meg keep kissing each other.